Rain had fallen steadily all morning on the day of the funeral, a soft but persistent Lahore drizzle that turned the narrow street into a shallow ribbon of reflected gray sky. Water dripped from the edges of tin roofs, pooled in cracked sidewalks, and darkened the brick walls of the modest double-story homes that lined both sides. Black umbrellas opened and closed like weary wings as the small procession moved slowly, family members in subdued white and black, a few neighbors trailing behind with lowered heads. Cars idled at the curb, exhaust mixing with the wet earth smell, until one by one they pulled away, leaving only tire tracks in the mud and the faint echo of engines fading toward the main road. By late afternoon, the rain eased into mist, then stopped altogether. The clouds parted just enough to let a pale, reluctant sun touch the rooftops, but no warmth followed. The street grew strangely still. Birds that had sheltered under eaves during the downpour stayed quiet. No children played in the lane. No vendors called out for vegetables or bread. Even the usual clamor of distant traffic seemed muffled, as though the whole mohalla had drawn a collective breath and forgotten to exhale. Ahmed lived in the house immediately next door, a simple place with peeling cream paint, iron-grilled windows, and a small front porch shaded by a neem tree, whose leaves still glistened with leftover rain. He had watched the procession from that porch earlier, standing with arms folded, offering only a slight nod when eyes met his. He hadn't joined the gathering. He rarely did. His days were quiet ones, books stacked on every surface, a kettle that whistled more often than voices filled the air, an old radio tuned low to news or qawwali when the mood allowed. As evening settled, the neighboring house remained almost completely dark. Only one lamp burned in what Ahmed knew was the living room, a warm, solitary glow behind thin curtains that barely moved. No flicker of a television screen. No silhouette passing back and forth. No sound at all leaked through the shared wall. No clatter of pots. No murmur of conversation with relatives who might have stayed. No footsteps climbing the wooden stairs. Just that single light, steady and small, like a candle someone had forgotten to blow out. Ahmed moved through his own routine without hurry. He switched on the ceiling fan to stir the humid air, filled the kettle from the tap, measured loose black tea into the pot along with a few cardamom pods and a pinch of fennel. While it brewed, he stood at the kitchen window that overlooked the narrow alley between the houses. He watched the lit window next door the way one might watch a distant shore from a boat, curious, not intrusive. The silence from that side felt heavier than usual, not empty but weighted, as though the house itself were pressing down on whatever remained inside. He carried his cup of chai to the small sitting area, settled into the worn armchair by the bookshelf, and opened a volume of Ghalib he had been rereading for weeks. The verses blurred slightly under the lamplight. Every few minutes his eyes lifted to the wall that separated his home from hers, listening for something, anything that might break the quiet. Nothing came, only the soft tick of his wall clock, the occasional drip from the eaves outside, and the low, almost imperceptible hum of the city beyond the lane. In that moment, Ahmed felt the thinness of things. How a single shared wall could hold back so much absence. How grief could turn even familiar rooms into strangers. How the ordinary rhythm of neighboring lives could suddenly expose the fragility beneath. He sipped his tea slowly, letting the steam rise and curl, and wondered, not for the first time, if silence like that could ever grow light enough to carry alone. The next morning arrived with a tentative clarity, the kind that follows heavy rain when the air still carries the scent of wet earth and washed leaves. The sun had risen low and pale over Lahore's rooftops, casting long, soft shadows across the lane. Water still dripped intermittently from the neem tree in Ahmed's small front yard, each drop hitting the concrete with a quiet plink that echoed in the hush. It was just past 8 a.m., early enough that most houses remained shuttered, curtains drawn against the light, but late enough that the milkman's bell had already faded down the street, and the first call to prayer from the nearby masjid had settled into memory. Ahmed was in the kitchen, rinsing his breakfast plate under the tap, when the 3 knocks came. They were soft, almost hesitant, 3 measured taps against the wooden door, not urgent, not demanding, but deliberate enough to carry through the house. He dried his hands on a dish towel, set it aside, and walked to the entrance. Through the small frosted glass panel in the door, he could make out a familiar silhouette, slight, wrapped in a navy shawl, head slightly bowed. He opened the door, Sara stood on the threshold, barefoot in simple rubber chapals that were still damp from crossing the wet lane. Her dupatta had slipped a little, revealing strands of dark hair that hadn't been combed or tied back properly. Her eyes were swollen and rimmed with red, not from fresh tears right then, but from a night that had clearly offered none of the relief sleep is supposed to bring. She looked smaller than he remembered, as though the weight of yesterday had pressed her inward, shrinking the space she occupied in the world. The shawl she clutched at her chest was the same one, from the funeral, navy blue with faint silver threading, now creased and carrying the faint smell of incense and damp fabric. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice barely rising above the drip-drip from the eaves. It cracked on the last word, thin as paper. I can't stay in there anymore. The silence is too heavy. It's like the house is holding its breath, waiting for him to come back. Every room feels like it's listening for his footsteps. And when they don't come," she trailed off, eyes dropping to the doormat between them. "I didn't know where else to go." Ahmed didn't speak at first. He simply stepped aside, holding the door wider in a quiet invitation. No questions, no assurances yet, just space. She hesitated for half a second, then crossed the threshold, her chapals leaving faint wet prints on the tiled floor. She paused in the narrow hallway, glancing around as if suddenly unsure she belonged there. The row of books on the wooden shelf, the faded rug underfoot, the faint aroma of cardamom lingering from his morning tea. He gestured gently toward the sitting area. "Come sit." She moved like someone walking through water, slow, careful, and lowered herself onto the very edge of his old couch, knees together, hands folded tightly in her lap as if to keep herself from unraveling. The cushions dipped slightly under her slight weight, but she perched there without settling, as though ready to stand and leave at any moment. Ahmed went back to the kitchen without hurry. He filled the kettle again, added fresh water, and set it on the stove. From the cupboard he took 2 cups, not his usual chipped one, but the better pair with faint rose patterns that he rarely used. While the water heated, he measured out the tea leaves, dropped in 3 cardamom pods, a small piece of cinnamon, and just a whisper of fennel seeds. The way chai is made when it's meant to comfort, rather than just wake. The kitchen filled with the familiar grounding scent as it came to a boil. He carried both cups back on a small tray, along with a saucer of glucose biscuits he kept for such mornings. He set 1 cup in front of her on the low table, plain, no sugar, the way he'd once overheard her husband order it years ago at the corner tea stall near the market, back when the 3 of them would sometimes exchange hellos across the fence. Ahmed remembered because small details like that had a way of sticking. Sara wrapped her hands around the warm cup without lifting it right away. Steam rose in thin curls between her fingers. She stared into the tea as though it held an answer she couldn't yet see. They sat in silence for a long stretch, not awkward, not forced, but the kind that allows breathing room. Outside, a single crow called once, twice, then fell quiet again. The wall clock ticked softly. Ahmed sipped his own chai slowly, watching the way her shoulders rose and fell with each careful breath. After several minutes, she finally lifted the cup to her lips. A small sip, then another. Her eyes closed briefly, as if the warmth was reaching someplace deep that had gone cold. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once. No need for more words yet. The silence between them had shifted, still heavy, but now shared and therefore a little less crushing. For the first time since the funeral, the quiet didn't feel like it was pressing in from all sides. It felt like something they could sit inside together, at least for this morning. By afternoon, the light had shifted, turning from the pale morning glow to a warmer, golden slant that filtered through the half-drawn curtains of Ahmed's sitting room. The neem tree outside cast dappled patterns across the rug, moving slowly as the sun climbed higher. The lane beyond the window had stirred to life in its restrained way. A distant motorcycle sputtered past. A child's laughter rang briefly from somewhere down the street. The faint clatter of a metal gate closing echoed once or twice, but inside the house held on to its quiet. The ceiling fan rotated lazily overhead, stirring the air without disturbing it, carrying the lingering scent of cardamom chai and the faint, clean smell of rain-soaked earth that still clung to everything. Sara had not moved much from her perch on the edge of the couch. Her cup sat empty now on the low table, the rose-patterned china catching a gleam of sunlight. She had loosened her grip on the navy shawl, letting it drape over her shoulders instead of clutching it like armor. Her breathing had steadied, though every so often a small, Involuntary sigh escaped her, like a valve releasing pressure that had built too long. Ahmed sat in the armchair opposite, legs crossed, one hand resting on the open book of Ghalib he had set aside earlier. He hadn't read since she arrived. The verses felt too distant for the moment. Instead, he watched her quietly, giving her the space to decide when or if words should come. After a stretch of time that could have been 20 minutes or an hour, she spoke. Her voice was low, almost testing the air. He used to hum while making breakfast, she said. Always the same old tune, something from his village near Faisalabad. A simple folk song about the river and the moon. I used to complain, it's too early for singing, I'd say. Let me sleep. He'd laugh and keep humming anyway. She paused, fingers tracing the rim of the empty cup. Now I keep waiting to hear it. Every morning I wake up listening for it. Like it might start again if I stay still long enough. But there's only the fan, the birds, the street, nothing else. Ahmed nodded slowly. He understood that kind of waiting, the way absence carves its own shape in the silence. My mother was the same with her radio, he offered after a moment. Every evening at 6, she'd tune to the old station for the news, and then the ghazals. After she passed, I kept turning it on at 6 for weeks. The house felt wrong without that crackle of static and her favorite voice reciting. Even when I switched it off, the quiet remembered her. Sara looked up at him then, eyes searching his face as if seeing him properly for the first time. Did it ever stop feeling wrong? Not all at once, he said honestly. Some days it still does, but the wrongness changes. It becomes part of the house instead of something fighting against it. The house instead of something fighting against it. She gave a small, tremulous nod. Then the tears came, quiet ones slipping down her cheeks without sound. She didn't sob. She simply let them fall. Wiping them once or twice with the edge of her dupatta, Ahmed reached for the tissue box on the side table, the plain white one he kept. They're more out of habit than expectation, and slid it toward her. She took one, pressed it to her eyes, then held it crumpled in her palm. I thought I'd be stronger by now, she whispered. Everyone says time heals. The aunties at the funeral kept telling me, Beta, sabr karo, waqt sab theek kar deta hai. But right now time just feels like more empty rooms. More mornings without him. More evenings where the lamp is on but no one's talking. Ahmed leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Sometimes healing doesn't look like strength at first. Sometimes it's just allowing the empty rooms to exist without trying to fill them right away, and letting someone sit in them with you so you're not alone in the echo. She looked at him for a long moment, something softening in her expression. You never came over much before, she said quietly. We said salam over the wall, borrowed sugar once or twice, but that was it. Why are you doing this? He shrugged faintly, a small lift of one shoulder. Because the wall is thin, Sara. And because I know what. It's like when the house forgets how to echo back your own voice. The room settled again, but the silence had changed texture, less oppressive, more like a blanket they could share. Outside, a vendor's call drifted in faintly. Chai garam. Garam chai. Then faded. A breeze moved the curtains, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant wood smoke. After a while, she asked almost shyly, What are you reading? He lifted the book. Ghalib. I come back to him when things feel too loud inside my head or too quiet. She tilted her head. Read something. If it's not too much. Ahmed opened to a marked page, found a couplet he knew by heart, and read softly in Urdu first, then translated. Zindagi ye bhi guzar jati hai. Dard ki intiha se guzar kar. Life passes like this too, by crossing the limit of pain. She listened with her eyes closed. When he finished, she murmured, It sounds like he understood. He did, Ahmed said. More than most. They talked then in fragments about the small garden she and her husband had planted together behind the house, the rose bush that still bloomed stubbornly even now, about Ahmed's collection of books, how some were gifts from his father, others bought from Anarkali Bazaar on quiet Sundays, about the way Lahore smells different after rain, cleaner, as if the city itself takes a breath. Neither rushed. Neither pretended the grief wasn't sitting between them like a third presence. They simply made room around it, enough space for memories to surface, for silences to breathe, for the afternoon to unfold without hurry. By the time the light began to slant lower, turning amber, Sara looked less like she might shatter. She stood slowly, smoothing her shawl. I should go back, she said. But thank you. For the chai. For the listening. Ahmed rose too. The door's always open. When the silence gets heavy again. She managed a small, genuine smile, the first since she'd knocked. I might take you up on that. As she stepped out onto the porch, the evening azan began to rise from the minaret down the street. Soft, melodic, wrapping around the lane like a familiar arm. She paused at the threshold, listening, then crossed back to her own door. Ahmed watched from his doorway until she was inside, the lamp in her window flickering on again. He closed his door gently, returned to his chair, and for the first time that day, the quiet in his own house felt companionable, rather than solitary days, turned into weeks with the slow, almost imperceptible rhythm of Lahore settling after the monsoon. The neem tree in Ahmed's yard dropped its first yellow leaves, carpeting the porch in pale gold. Mornings grew cooler. Evenings carried the faint bite of winter creeping in from the north. The lane outside filled again with its usual sounds, school children shouting on their way home, the vegetable cart's bell, the sharp honk of rickshaws turning the corner. But inside the two neighboring houses, a different kind of routine had taken root. Sara began coming over most evenings, not every single day, and never with any announcement or expectation. Sometimes she knocked softly around sunset. Sometimes she simply appeared at the open door with a small steel dabba of biryani or sabzi she'd cooked too much of, saying quietly, I made extra. Take it. Ahmed never turned her away. He'd set an extra cup beside the kettle without asking, or pull the second chair closer to the lamp when the light faded. They rarely spoke of the future. There were no grand declarations, no hurried plans to fill the emptiness with something new. Instead, the connection grew in small, steady ways. A shared newspaper passed across the fence in the morning, a book she borrowed and returned with a folded page marking a line she liked, a quiet hour on his porch watching the sky change color, while neither felt the need to explain the silence. One evening in early December, when the air had turned crisp enough to warrant shawls indoors, Sara arrived carrying a small clay pot of sheer kurma she'd made for the first time since the funeral. She set it on the low table between them, the sweet smell of vermicelli, dates, and cardamom rising warm and familiar. Ahmed brought 2 bowls and spoons. They ate slowly, savoring the richness without hurry. After a few spoonfuls, she set her bowl down and looked at him across the table. The lamp cast a soft circle of light around them, leaving the rest of the room in gentle shadow. I used to think grief was something you carried alone, she said. That asking for help made it worse, made you weaker somehow. Like if I let anyone in, the pain would spill out and never stop. She paused, tracing the rim of the bowl with one finger. But you never made me feel like a burden. You never asked me to be okay before I was ready. You just sat with me in it. Ahmed met her eyes steadily. Neighbors are for more than borrowing sugar, he said, repeating the words he'd told her weeks earlier. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Or sharing sheer kurma when it turns out better than expected. She laughed then, the first real, unguarded laugh he'd heard from her since before everything changed. It was soft, surprised, like sunlight breaking suddenly through clouds after days of overcast. The sound filled the room, bright and startling in its simplicity. And for a moment neither of them spoke, letting it linger. When the laughter faded, she leaned back against the couch, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The house still feels quiet sometimes, she admitted, especially at night. But it's not the same heavy silence anymore. It's softer, like there's room in it now. Ahmed nodded. Room enough for 2 people to sit in it, maybe. She looked at him for a long moment, something warm and unspoken passing between them. Then she reached for her bowl again, took another spoonful, and said lightly, This is good. I think he would have liked it. He would have, Ahmed agreed. And he'd have hummed that river song the whole time he ate it. They finished the sheer kurma in companionable quiet. Outside, the azan for Isha rose from the minaret, melodic and unhurried, wrapping around the lane like a familiar prayer. When it ended, Sara stood, smoothing her dupatta. I'll bring the pot back tomorrow, she said. No hurry, he replied, walking her to the door. She paused on the threshold, glancing back at the warm light spilling from his sitting room onto the porch. Good night, Ahmed. Good night, Sara. She crossed the short distance to her own door, the lamp already glowing in her window like a quiet promise. Ahmed watched until she was inside, then closed his own door gently against the night air. He returned to his chair, picked up the book he'd left open earlier but didn't read. Instead, he sat listening to the house around him, the soft tick of the clock, the faint rustle of leaves outside, the distant hum of the city settling for sleep. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel solitary. It felt shared even across the thin wall, steady, kind, patient. And in that shared quiet, the silence stopped being something to endure. It became something they could both rest in, side by side, until the world felt ready to turn again, carrying them gently forward together.